sword with clash and slither. Rising on a steep pitch of sound from 100 savage throats on all sides, they swarmed upon us, 100 to 30. Back to back we stood, shields lapped, blades at guard. Those blades were red, but corselets and helmets too were red. One advantage we possessed: we were armored, and our foes were not. Yet they flung themselves naked to the fray, with as fierce a valor as if they were clad in steel. Then for a moment they drew off and stood at a distance, gasping curses. Blood from sword thrusts making strange patterns on their woad-painted skins. 30 men. 30. The remnant of the troop of 500 that had marched so arrogantly from Hadrian's wall. Zeus! What a plan! "500 men, sent forth to hew a way through a land that swarmed with barbarians of another age. Marching over heather hills by day, hacking a crimson trail through blood-frenzied hordes. Close camp at night, with snarling, gibbering beings that stole past the sentries to slay with silent dagger. Battle, bloodshed, carnage. And word would go to the emperor in his fine palace among his nobles and his women that another expedition had disappeared among the hazy mountains of the mystic north. I glanced at the men who were my comrades. There were Romans from Latinia and native-born Romans. There were Britons, Germans, and a flame-haired Hibernian. I looked at the wolves in human guise that ringed us round. Dwarfish, hairy men they were, bowed and gnarled of limb, long and mighty of arm, with great mops of coarse hair topping foreheads that slanted like apes. Small, unblinking black eyes glinted malevolent spite, like a snake's eyes. Scarce any clothing they wore, and they bore small round shields, long spears and short swords with oval-shaped blades. While scarce one of them topped 5 feet in height, their incredibly broad shoulders denoted massive strength, and they were as quick as cats. They came with a rush. Short, savage sword clashed on short Roman sword. It was fighting at very close quarters, for the savages were better adapted to such battling, and the Romans trained their soldiers in the use of the short blade. There the Roman shield was at disadvantage, for it was too heavy to be shifted swiftly, and the savages crouched, thrusting upward. Back to back we stood, and as a man fell, we closed the ranks again. On they pushed, until their snarling faces were close to ours, and their rank, beast-like breath was in our nostrils. Like men of steel we held the formation. The heather, the hills, time itself faded. A man ceased to be a man and became a mere fighting automaton. The haze of battle erased mind and soul. Swing! Thrust! A blade shattering on shield. A bestial face snarling through the battle fog. Smite! The face vanishing for another face, equally bestial. Years of Roman culture slipped away like sea fog before the sun. I was again a savage, a primal man of the forest and seas. A primal man facing a tribe of another age, fierce in tribal hate, fierce with the slaughter lust. How I cursed the shortness of the Roman sword I wielded. A spear crashed against my breastplate, a sword shattered on my helmet crest, beating me to the ground. Up I reeled, slaying the smiter with a fierce upslashing thrust. Then I stopped short, sword raised. Over all the heather was silence. No more foes stood before me. In a silent, gory band they lay, still grasping their swords, hacked and hewn faces still set in snarls of hate. And of the 30 that had faced them, there remained 5. 2 Romans, a Briton, the Irishman, and I. The Roman sword and the Roman armor had triumphed, and incredible as it seemed, we had slain nearly 4 times our own number. And there was but one thing we might do. Hew our way back over the trail we had come, seek to gain through countless leagues of ferocious land. On every hand, great mountains reared, snow crowned their summits, and the land was not warm. How far north we were, we had no idea. The march was but a hazy memory into whose crimson fogs days and nights faded in a red panorama. All we knew was some days agone, the remnants of the Roman army had been scattered among the peaks by a terrific tempest, on whose mighty wings the savages had assailed us by hordes. And the war horns had droned through the vales and crags for days, and the 100 of us who had held together had battled every step of the way, beset by yelling foemen who seemed to swarm from thin air. Now, silence reigned, and there was no sign of the tribesmen. South we headed, going like hunted things. But before we set out, I found upon the battlefield that which thrilled me with a fierce joy. Grasped in the hand of a tribesman was a long 2-handed sword, a Norse sword by the hand of Thor. How the savages came by it, I know not. Possibly some yellow-haired Viking had gone down among them, battle song on bearded lips, sword swinging, but at least the sword was there. So fiercely had the savage clinched the hilt that I was forced to chop off his hand to gain the sword. With it in my grasp, I felt bolder. Short swords and shields might suffice for men of middle height, but they were feeble arms for a warrior who towered more than 5 inches above 6 feet. Over the mountains we went, clinging to narrow cliff edges, scaling steep crags. Like so many insects, we crawled along the face of a sky-towering precipice of such gigantic proportions that it seemed to dwarf men into mere nothingness. Up over its brow we climbed, nearly beaten down by the high mountain wind that roared with the voice of giants. And there we found they who waited for us. The Briton went down with a spear through him, reeled up, clutched him that wielded it, and over the cliff they tumbled together to fall for 1,000 feet. A wild, short flurry of fury, a whirl of swords, and the battle was over. 4 tribesmen lay still at our feet, and one of the Romans crouched, seeking to stem the blood that leaped from the stump of a severed arm. Over the cliff we shoved those we had slain, and we did up the Roman's arm with leather strips, binding them tight so that the arm ceased to bleed. Then once more we took up our way, on, crags reeled above us, gorse slopes tilted crazily. The sun towered above the swaying peaks and sloped westward. Then as we crouched upon a crag, hidden by great boulders, a band of tribesmen passed beneath, walking upon a narrow trail that skirted precipices and wound around mountain shoulders. and as they passed beneath us, the Irishmen gave a shout of wild joy, and bounding from the cliff, fell among them. With yells like wolves, they rushed upon him, and his red hair gleamed above their black. The first to reach him went down with a cleft head, and the second screeched as his arm left his shoulder. With a wild battle yell, he drove his sword through a hairy breast, plucked it forth, and smote off a head. Then they swarmed over him like wolves over a lion, and an instant later, his head went up on a spear. The face still seemed to wear the battle joy. They passed on, never suspecting our presence, and again we pressed on. Night fell, and the moon rose, making the peaks rear up like vague ghosts, throwing strange shadows among the valleys. As we went, we found signs of the march and of the retreat. There a Roman lying at the foot of a precipice, a smashed heap, perhaps a long spear through him. There a headless body, there a bodiless head. Shattered helmets, broken swords told the mute tale of fiercely contested battles. On through the night we staggered, halting only at dawn, when we hid ourselves among the boulders and ventured forth again, only when night had fallen. Groups of tribesmen passed close, but we remained undiscovered, though at times we could have touched them as they went. Dawn was breaking when we came upon a different land, a land that was merely a great plateau. Mountains towered on every hand, except to the south, where the level land seemed to run for a long way. So I believed that we had left the mountains and had come upon the foothills that stretched away to finally merge upon the fertile plains of the south. So we came upon a lake and halted there. There was no sign of a foe, no smoke in the sky. But as we stood there, the Roman who had but one arm pitched forward on his face without a sound, and there was a throwing spear through him. We scanned the lake. No boats rippled its surface. No foe showed among the scant reeds near its bank. We turned, gazing across the heather, and without a sound, the Roman crumpled and fell forward, a short spear standing between his shoulders. Sword, bared and mazed, I searched the silent slopes for sign of a foe. The heath stretched bare from mountain to mountains, and nowhere was the heather tall enough to hide a man. Not even a Caledonian. No ripple stirred the lake. What caused that reed to sway when the others were motionless? I bent forward, peering into the water. Beside the reed, a bubble rose to the surface. I bent nearer, wondering. A bestial face leered up at me, just below the surface of the lake. An instant's astoundment, then my frantic swung sword split that hairy face, checking just in time the spear that leaped for my breast. The waters of the lake boiled in turmoil, and presently there floated to the surface the form of the savage, the sheaf of throwing spears still in his belt, his ape-like hand still grasping the hollow reed through which he had breathed. Then I knew why so many Romans had been strangely slain by the shores of the lakes. I flung away my shield, discarded all accoutrements except my sword, dagger, and armor. A certain ferocious exultation thrilled me. I was one man, amid a savage land, amid a savage people who thirsted for my blood. By Thor and Woden, I would teach them how a Norseman passed. With each passing moment, I became less of the cultured Roman. All dross of education and civilization slipped from me, leaving only the primitive man, only the primordial soul, red-taloned, ferocious. And a slow, deep rage began to rise in me, coupled with a vast Nordic contempt for my foes. I was in good mood to go berserk. Thor knows I had had fighting in plenty along the march and along the retreat. But the fighting soul of the Norse was astir in me that has mystic depths deeper than the North Sea. I was no Roman. I was a Norseman, a hairy-chested, yellow-bearded barbarian, and I strode the heath as arrogantly as if I trod the deck of my own galley. Picts! What were they? Stunted dwarfs whose day had passed. It was strange what a terrific hate began to consume me. And yet not so strange, for the further I receded in savagery, the more primitive my impulses became, and the fiercer flamed the intolerant hatred of the stranger. That first impulse of the primal tribesman. But there was a deeper, more sinister reason at the back of my mind, though I knew it not. For the Picts were men of another age, in very truth, the last of the Stone Age peoples, whom the Celts and Nordics had driven before them when they came down from the north. And somewhere in my mind lurked a nebulous memory of fierce, merciless warfare waged in a darker age. And there was a certain awe, too, not for their fighting qualities, but for the sorcery which all peoples firmly believed the Picts to possess. I had seen their cromlechs all over Britain, and I had seen the great rampart they had built not far from Corinium. I knew that the Celtic druids hated them with a hate that was surprising, even in priests. Not even the druids could or would tell just how the Stone Age men reared those immense barriers of stone, or for what reason. And the mind of the ordinary man fell back upon that explanation which has served for ages: witchcraft. More, the Picts themselves believed firmly that they were warlocks, and perhaps that had something to do with it. And I fell to wondering just why we 500 men had been ordered out on that wild raid. Some had said to seize a certain Pictish priest, some that we sought word of the Pictish chief, one BRAN MAK MORN. But none knew, except the officer in command, and his head rode a Pictish spear somewhere out in that sea of mountain and heather. I wished that I could meet that same BRAN MAK MORN. 'Twas said that he was unmatched in warfare, either with army or singly. But never had we seen a warrior who seemed so much in command as to justify the idea that he was the chief. For the savages fought like wolves, though with a certain rude discipline. Perhaps I might meet him, and if he were as valiant as they said, he would surely face me. I scorned concealment. Nay, more, I chanted a fierce song as I strode, beating time with my sword. Let the Picts come when they would, I was ready to die like a warrior. I had covered many miles when I rounded a low hill and came full upon some 100 of them, fully armed. If they expected me to turn and flee, they were far in error. I strode to meet them, never altering my gait, never altering my song. One of them charged to meet me, head down, point on, and I met him with a down-smiting blow. that cleft him from left shoulder to right hip. Another sprang in from the side, thrusting at my head, but I ducked so that the spear swished over my shoulder and ripped out his guts as I strained. Then they were surging all about me, and I cleared a space with one great two-handed swing and set my back close to the steep hillside. Close enough to prevent them from running behind me, but not too close for me to swing my blade. If I wasted motion and strength in the up and down movement, I more than made up by the smashing power of my sword blows. No need to strike twice on any foe. A sword-bearded savage sprang in under my sword, crouching, stabbing upward. The sword blade turned on my corselet, and I stretched him senseless with a downward smash of the hilt. They ringed me like wolves, striving to reach me with their shorter swords, and two went down with cleft heads as they tried to close with me. Then one, reaching over the shoulders of the others, drove a spear through my thigh, and with a roar of fury, I thrust savagely, spitting him like a rat. Before I could regain my balance, a sword gashed my right arm, and another shattered upon my helmet. I staggered, swung wildly to clear a space, and a spear tore through my right shoulder. I swayed, went to the ground, and reeled up again. With a terrific swing of my shoulders, I hurled my clawing, stabbing foes clear, and then, feeling my strength oozing from me with my blood, gave one lion-like roar and leaped among them, clean berserk. Into the press I hurled myself, smiting left and right, depending only on my armor to guard me from the leaping blades. That battle is a crimson memory. I was down, up, down again, up, right arm hanging, sword flailing in left hand. A man's head spun from his shoulders, an arm vanished at the elbow, and then I crumpled to the ground, striving vainly to lift the sword that hung in my loose grasp. A dozen spears were at my breast in an instant, when someone threw the warrior's back, and a voice spoke as of a chief.
Stay. This man must be spared.
Vaguely as through a fog, I saw a lean, dark face as I reeled up to face the man who spoke. Vaguely I saw a slim, dark-haired man whose head would come scarcely to my shoulder, but who seemed as lithe and strong as a leopard. He was scantily clad in plain, close-fitting garments, his only arm a long, straight sword. He resembled in form and features the Picts, no more than did I. And yet there was about him a certain apparent kinship to them. All those things I noted vaguely, scarce able to keep my feet. I have seen you, I said, speaking as one mazed. Often and often in the forefront of battle I have seen you. Always you led the Picts to the charge while your chiefs slunk far from the field. Who are you? Then the warriors and the world and the sky faded, and I crumpled to the heath. Vaguely I heard the strange warrior say,
Stanch his wounds and give him food and drink.
I had learned their language from Picts who came to trade at the wall.
So, you have survived your first encounter with the savage Picts? Well done. This has been an extended preview of The Men of the Shadows by Robert E. Howard, a part of the legend of BRAN MAK MORN, now in production. Coming soon from the Hyborian Archives. All audiobook presentations from the Hyborian Archives are made freely available to the public for streaming and download, thanks to the generous and continued support of viewers and listeners like you. From all of us at the Hyborian Archives, thank you.